I always told them, we can fight another day, but you need to get out of there safely. So this is a story that I had told to both of my sons, the infamous talk, which you, I think, have to give. And this is a story, a talk also told to me as I was growing up, and I was totally aware from my father, my uncles, my brothers, and others about how particularly black men would be targeted by authority figures for abuse and harassment. So it was a story that I had told my sons, and I told them not only in terms of the police, but even in terms of just going out. I told them when you go into a store, you need to make eye contact with the clerk. You need to make sure that they see where your hands are. You have all these things you have to do because you are going to be under suspicion from just being who you are. And interesting enough, my youngest son years later told me that when he was working for a store in the mall, that they told him to particularly pay attention to the black people who came into the store. And he thought that was strange for them to tell him that, since he was black. I thought, well, maybe they would feel some vulnerability on behalf of black people and young black people. Is a real thing. And we had chosen to live in the West End actually for protection. We had chosen to remain there because I thought that's where they would be the safest. Another incident with the same commit some graffiti, write some graffiti on the side of a building near the Mall St. Matthews. My son almost never goes to St. Matthews, by the way, anymore. So he stays out of that area. But he was there. And so this young man starts writing on the wall. My son's afraid that he will be singled out. So he walks away. A neighbor sees the kids out there. She reports about the graffiti, but she says from the Mall St. Matthews, and when I get there, they said, we know your son didn't do anything. We know who did it, but he is not allowed to come back into the mall for 30 days. And so I said, well, I don't know why that would be the case. He said, well, it'd be better for him just to stay away. And I think ultimately it probably was better for him to stay away because he was pretty ticked and shaken with that. And the fact is that they knew he hadn't done anything, but that didn't stop them from wanting to punish him for someone else's behavior. The thing that when I think about this story, especially the one with being cuffed, put on the side of the sidewalk, sitting out there in the dark, I remember that the other thing that happened that day, and this was part of my story I almost never tell, but I will tell you, my friends know it, my family knows it. The same day that my son told me he was stopped by the police, later that evening, I had to go to the hospital. And they thought at first it was a heart attack. It wasn't. It was a heart spasm, which is not as serious. But when the doctors were trying to determine why I had this, they could find no physiological reason for me having this. And so they said it must be emotional. And I understood that it was. What I didn't understand about me was why I was so upset by this, given the fact that he came out of this alive. He came out of this without really being physically hurt. And I was thinking, if I'm this upset over this incident, then how much more to grieve and be empathetic and sympathetic to parents who have such a far more dangerous, a far more deadly outcome. So as years have gone by, I've started to think that one reason I believe it was so upsetting to me was the fact that my theoretical talk to my children had become their reality. And that I knew from there on, this could be their reality. This was no more theoretical. This was an actual thing. I will say I did follow up, by the way, with the police departments that I thought maybe the police departments. I wasn't sure. My son wasn't sure. I will say it was not LMPD. It was also not St. Matthews. And they both told me that my car was never reported as stolen. So they didn't know why anyone would have said that. So, we have many cities in Jefferson County, many of which have their own police departments, and it was one of the smaller police departments. But for me and for, I think, other Black parents, the reality that the dangers of our children may encounter are real things. And there is a reason to be concerned, and it's not overreacting, and it's not spreading fear, it's trying to really keep them alive. Thank you.
Good evening. Usually when people think of Black community in Louisville, Kentucky, they think of everything west of 9th Street. But the truth is, the oldest Black community in Louisville is in the east end of Louisville in a small community called Smoketown. Unfortunately, Smoketown, like the West End, historically has been a neglected community, especially when I first got there many decades ago. And as a consequence of it being neglected, it had become a pocket of poverty with a high misery index and all of the pathologies that accompany communities like that, not just in Smoketown, Black communities of poverty, but across metropolitan areas across the country. And all the pathologies that are accompanying those communities accompany Smoketown: high misery index. There was a proliferation of drugs and crack houses. There was a proliferation of liquor stores, of people who did not live in the community who were simply LMPD with the police department in protest, and it was not because there was any crime going on or that the possibility of crime, but it was a show of intimidation and enforce, and they were told to go in the house essentially because we said go in the house. That's the kind of thing that happened because some people know, Black people know, that when the police are dispatched to communities like that, it is not because they have in their mind often that they are to protect and serve, but to control and monitor. They don't feel protected. They don't feel protected by the police. They feel under surveillance by the police. And oftentimes it's because they believe there's this bias that because of their skin has been kissed by nature's son, that they are criminals by default. And one of the strategies they use to control communities like that is racial profiling. And I was racial profiled some time ago in that same community. I was on my way to church, I believe. Our church is located in Smoketown. I used to live in Smoketown for 12 years. And I was on my way, and then of course I heard the sirens and saw the lights and assumed it must have been for me. So I pulled over, hands at 10 and 2, and the police came to the window, and I rolled the window down, and he asked me for my identification. I gave him my license and registration and insurance. In the course of the conversation, I asked him why I was stopped, and he said, "You were stopped because you did not come to a complete stop." Most woke black folk know that that is simply a strategy often used by police if they think you're suspicious and they can't find any legitimate way of stopping you, so they use things like, "You didn't stop completely at a stop sign." I knew I had stopped completely at a stop sign. I was in no hurry. I was on my way to work, but that's what he said. "You didn't stop completely at the stop sign, so that's why I stopped you." So in the course of the conversation, I continued talking with him and then he asked me, "Why are you in the community?" Now I think he stopped me because I was suspicious. Not because I was smoking a joint while I was in the car or was drinking while I was driving, but I was suspicious because at the time I was a relatively young black man in a triple black Chrysler 300C. And that's the black man's Bentley. And so it looks like a real expensive car, but it's not. And so when you see a black man in a nice car in a community like that, something must be up. But I wasn't committing any crime. I wasn't weaving in. So it was good to say that you didn't stop at a stop sign. So in the course of the conversation, he asked me, "What are you doing here? What are you doing in the community?" Well, he stopped me at the corner of Clay and Lambton, which ironically, Lambton Street now is named after me, believe it or not. That's where they stopped me. They stopped me at the corner. They stopped me at the corner of Clay and Lambton, and you can see our church building. We have a large church building because we have a large congregation of several thousand people. So when he asked me what I was doing in the community, I just pointed to the building and said, "You see that building right there?" I said, "That large church building, I happen to pastor the people who gather there." And so his countenance kind of changed and the conversation sort of altered. I guess in his mind he calculated that he wasn't going to get much out of this interrogation because nobody pretends like they're a pastor. And so he, after we talked a little more, he said, "Well, here, I'll give you your information back." And he said, "And of course, make sure that you stop at the stop signs." And so I was under the impression I was prepared to leave. And as I got ready to leave, he said, "Oh, by the way, do you have any guns and drugs in your car?" Now, I didn't, so I said no. But if I had, I wouldn't have said yes. And he didn't ask me, did I have any guns and drugs in my car after that conversation because he believed I might have guns and drugs in my car. And he wasn't asking that because I was a part of policy either. He, I believe, asked me that question for two reasons at least. One reason he asked me that question was to communicate to me that I don't care who you say you are, to me, you're just like anybody else in this community, and I'll treat you accordingly. The second reason I think he said that to me, the second reason he asked me is because he was telling me that I'm the police, I have power, I have prerogatives because I have power. So he was establishing the power dynamic between me and police in the community. And as long as we keep thinking that the reason why this historical problem that has persisted for so long between police and black communities is simply because there are a few bad apples on the tree, we will not realize that the issue is not on the limbs, the issue is in the root. That there is a poisonous disposition, a poisonous culture in the police department that is a reflection of a poisonous culture that is in our country of racism and white supremacy that infects all of it. And if we don't recognize it, we'll need something a little bit more radical than an hour-long diversity class on bias. Then we will always run the risk of some black person whose dignity is attacked, or their person is attacked, or their life is lost simply because they happen to be a black person driving a nice car in a black neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you to Judge Denise Clayton and Dr. F. Bruce Williams for sharing their stories, and thanks to everyone here and those tuning in virtually. I'm Darcy Costello, the Metro Government reporter at the Courier-Journal. Chief Shields, I want to give you the opportunity to respond to what the storytellers shared and give your perspective on policing and how we move forward.
Well, first off, I would like to say thank you for the stories. I wish that what we heard was exceptional, but it's not. It's something that you hear over and over again because it occurs ad nauseum. So obviously, the job that I have before me is pretty well laid out. What I would say is, and I hope at some level, listen folks, I've made my career out of saying we've had to do things differently. So you're not going to see me in any way defend or try to further what has been so grossly unfair and such a, I'm the first person to say there has to be change. But what I hope that we can get out of this conversation tonight is an understanding and of an idea of how do you, in this space, if you're in my shoes and you've got 172 homicides, and then 75% of our victims are African American, at some level, there's going to have to be an interaction between the police and the Black community. And the question is, what does that look like? And so, for me, what I would hope that this panel and this discussion can do is have a mature conversation so that we can find that path forward collectively. Thank you.
So to set the stage for this conversation, as you touched on, you've been tasked with turning around a department that a top to bottom review found in crisis that's also under federal investigation. But at the same time, violent crime is on the rise and officers have been leaving the department, creating staffing constraints. So I guess, how do you see the state of LMPD right now, and what is your roadmap moving forward?
Well, there's obviously a huge number of challenges. First and foremost, you can't just say robustly go and police, regardless of the community, if you don't have confidence in how the policing has been done. And so for us, it's really, for me and the team that I've put together, it is being very methodical and deliberate in our approach. What I see is a department that has, over the last decade, done an exceptionally poor job of diversifying, of embracing change, in affording personnel leadership training. There are so many deficiencies that, to the Reverend's point, that it isn't just on the surface. They've really manifested themselves. And, you know, when you look at what I appreciate that you touched on, Reverend, was I'm hiring human beings, and these same behaviors that I'm contending with are the behaviors that all of you have in your employ. And it's naive to think that it's just policing. Policing is the enforcement arm, and by all means, we can do far more damage than the person who works at Coca-Cola, take for example. But at the end of the day, I would say to you all, I mean, look around your table and hear the commentary towards one another. And so we have a lot of work ahead of us, but at the end of the day, there are good men and women, Black and white, who wear this uniform, who want to get it correct. They want to be shown how to do it correctly. And they want the community to trust them. And that's huge. But we have our work cut out for us.
Do any panelists have a response to that about what you think the path forward for Louisville is?
I can respond. Can you all, I hate microphones. For me, I think the first way to a path forward is to actually acknowledge what the problem is, that harm has been done. Yeah. I think we heard Reverend Williams say, tell his story. We heard Judge Clayton tell her story. And these are two prominent Black people in our communities who probably thought they were safe or their children were safe because they did all the right things, right? And then we hear Chief Shields then turn around and say, the story's not exceptional, but there has been no public acknowledgement of the harm that has been done. So we can't move forward. We can't move forward until somebody says, my bad. We messed up. You can say we got to do better, but until you acknowledge the harm that's been done, you can't move forward.
So, Marion, coming from a diversity and equity mindset, what kind of training improvements do you think LMPD could make around implicit bias? And do you have an example of a time when you've seen that take place?
So those of you who know me, you know I do a lot of implicit bias training. And on any given year, I do between 250 and 300 trainings, not just on implicit bias, but racism, power and privilege and all of that, but it has to go beyond training. Training is just level setting. It is just building awareness. Has to be coupled with accountability. But I think the most important thing that police officers need to be trained around is their history. And the fact that they began as slave patrols. They began hunting down black and brown people, and we're in 2021, and they are still hunting down black and brown people. So one of my favorite quotes, people hear me say it all the time, is by psychologist Joy DeGruy, who posits America's pathology is her denial. We're sick because we won't tell the truth. So that's LMPD, that's our institutions, that's our communities, that's us as individuals. So black people have been told lies about who we are. White people have been told lies about who we are. So I think we have to go all the way back to the beginning and actually teach the truth so we know what we're healing.
Chief Shields, do you expect training to be a focus of the DOJ's ongoing investigation, and where might Louisville see changes in that area?
Oh, for sure. And listen, yes. I mean, I don't disagree with what's been said, but at the end of the day, again, it's what is the path forward? So what you're going to see, and I think this has been the Achilles heel for so long of law enforcement, is that all of the training has been done by sworn personnel who at some level are a part of a culture. And you don't, when you're in something that is just so familiar, you don't see the deficiencies as quickly as you should. And so you're going to see that we're going to be bringing in a very high-ranking civilian to be over what's been created, courtesy of my friends here at Council who appropriated money in the budget, the Accountability and Improvement Bureau. So this will be a civilian, whether their experience as an attorney or if they've been an attorney general, I don't know. But overseeing everything that's related to training and reform. You're going to see a high-ranking civilian academic director hired so that the course material is not just through the lens of law enforcement. I think that, you know, as was said, yes, you roll out the training and it is level setting, but absolutely, there has to be the ongoing training, but more so there has to be the ongoing monitoring of behaviors. And so for us, one of the best creations in the last decade, or 8 years, I guess, has been body-worn cameras, because historically when a person gets in their patrol car and goes out, you just have their word for what they're doing. And body-worn cameras have allowed us to see real time what is occurring. And it's not enough to just look at the body-worn camera post-incident. These have to be getting audited continually. So that's where we're bringing in the civilians to be auditing these cameras. So training will be a huge part of it, but it's only one part of it.
One step taken after the events of 2020 was the creation of a new Inspector General position and Civilian Review Board, legislation championed by Councilwoman McCraney. Councilwoman, why is this oversight board important for the community?
Well, first let me say that this particular ordinance began in 2019, a year before Breonna Taylor was killed. And the reason why it had started being written is because I served on the prior board. That board was an oversight board, And it was created to look at the dysfunction of LMPD and some of the mishaps that might have occurred in their policies and in their procedures. But what actually happened was when we came together as a board, we would listen to the public unit of the police department, and they would say to us, this is the case that we have looked at, it has been adjudicated, and this is the result. And so as a board, all we had to do was say, okay. We just had to rubber stamp what was already investigated, what was already adjudicated. We had no say as a oversight board. So when I got elected, I decided that that was the one thing I knew I wanted to take up as legislation. So I began to write it. And as I started asking questions and researching about what oversight boards should look like, I actually thought the community was not ready. The community would not have been ready at the time that I was looking at this to embrace all the possibilities of what an oversight board should do for a police department. So in actuality, I put it to the side. About 4 months after I had looked at it and researched and written some of the ordinance. You fast forward about 8 months later, and Breonna Taylor was shot. That was the perfect time to pick that legislation back up and say, this is needed. If the community's not ready, the community had better get ready. And so we started writing it, and we put things in there that absolutely told the story of how important it is for civilians to review some of the actions of the police department. But lo and behold, the legislature on the state level would not grant subpoena power. So without that subpoena power, we're not really capable as a board to compel evidence or to compel someone to come and speak. But there is always a way around everything. And so I have a solution. I may share it with you, but I can tell you that it's important to have an oversight board because of the trust factor. Right now, we have no trust between our police department and our citizens. And unless you have a true civilian review board, the trust will not be built up. And as we were writing this legislation, there were a lot of factions that wanted us to put police officers on the board. And I fought very hard to make that not a reality. So we have a great civilian review board, a group of people who are dedicated to the cause of looking at things as they occur, not things that were passed, not things that have already been adjudicated. So we're here and we're waiting to look forward to the Inspector General to come on board to see how they can partner with LMPD. But what I'm hearing now is that LMPD are making a lot of changes, and they are doing it internally. And I believe that they're getting further and further away from partnering with the Civilian Review Board because they think that all the changes they're doing within their department will be the answer. But I can guarantee you, with all the changes that they make on the inside, we still need an outside Civilian Review Board to monitor everything that they do.
Anyone else want to weigh in on the importance of that kind of oversight mechanism?
Well, listen, I'll be the first one to say that any major city, you have to expect there's going to be a civilian review board. So that to me is not, and I don't know, I'm sorry, Councilwoman, to hear that you think we're moving away from it. That could not be further from the truth. A progressive police department doesn't just lock in on one thing. You have multiple checks and balances. And so what's held up thus far was there wasn't an inspector general hired. That inspector general's just been hired. The board is not up operational yet. I've met with the board president of it, Jennifer Green. We look forward to working with them. That is absolutely going to be one of the avenues that we are working with. So please don't take the fact that we are trying to improve things that somehow that is eliminating what you've done. Any city has to expect that there's going to be a civilian review board. And I've had In my time in Atlanta, I had one period of time under one chief that was very controversial, very adversarial is a better word, and then we shifted, there was a different director, and it became one more of cooperation. And I will tell you, the spirit of cooperation resulted in us gleaning some really critical feedback. So you don't have to worry about my support there.
I do believe you have the support. I do believe you
that's probably
have
fair.
the support.
That's probably fair.
Now, there are so many others involved in the you, you know? And so the proof will be in the pudding, and we are hopeful that it will be a partnership whereby they do not have to beg for people to come forward and speak to them, and that they don't have to look for the state to pass an ordinance or a law that says they have subpoena power, because that's not going to happen. In fact, we thought we were so close at getting that, but what happened was they put the subpoena portion in with so many other flawless requests. I mean, they wanted to do away with some term limits. They wanted to make the mayor's race nonpartisan. It was just a whole plethora of other things that they threw the request for subpoena power in with. And so unless they are willing, they meaning the state level legislators, willing to put that as a separate entity and vote on just it, there will never be subpoena power. So we need cooperation from the police department, 100%.
Another focus around public safety solutions this year has been the deflection model, or sending non-police responders to some emergency calls. Kalila, do you want to talk a little bit about the community engagement work you did and what residents hope to see from that pilot project?
Sure. So over the past, it's November now. So over the past 7 months or so, collaboration between Spalding University, 7 County Services, University of Louisville, some community members have formed a steering committee to do a feasibility study, which you all know has reflected in the city having a new deflection project. And so my responsibility or role in that was talking to community members about what they hope to see and what they thought about or how they define public safety. And so I was expecting to hear a lot of things around police in neighborhoods or community policing or things like that. And that's not what I heard. When I asked people what did public safety mean to them or community safety mean to them, they said things like adequate housing, access to jobs, resourced neighborhoods, access to education, and very basic needs to thrive in their communities. And so it to me just solidified that we're talking about, and again, Reverend Williams talked about this in his story, we're talking about communities that have been disinvested in and disenfranchised for generations. And so people were saying we need these things to thrive. And so as I was doing violence prevention work 5, 6, 7 years ago in this city, we talked about how do you prevent violence? You resource communities, right? And so that hasn't changed. And we haven't resourced communities in 5 or 6, 7 years either. And so we want to talk about why the homicide rates are going up. We haven't put any money into investing into these communities in a real way, right? We're throwing tons of money into, you said deflection project, I'm sorry. So what we're gonna be doing is looking at calls where folks need people to come out in the system that may not need a police response. At this time, typically, if you don't need EMS or fire, police is who shows up at your door. And so figuring out ways that we support people who are having crisis that may not need a police response. And so that's what's gonna be happening over the next few months. It's a pilot project, so you all have to bear with us, but it's a community-driven, a community-responsive project. And so we need your all's feedback, we need your all's engagement, we need your all's voices at the table and in communication, because this is about taking care of the community and really thinking about what community needs to be safe.
And just to touch on that a little bit more, when you were talking to residents, what did they say about why this type of pilot would benefit their public safety?
because they don't feel safe when police are in their homes or in their neighborhoods. And so figuring out, they told me they didn't need police, they needed resources. That's what I was told by community members. I had community members tell me that, I had a woman tell me who has a debilitating, actual terminal illness that has episodes, and that she does not call 911 when she's having an episode because she is scared for police to come into her house when she's having one of these episodes, because she's scared that she can't comply with whatever they ask her to do and it may end up fatal. I had to play devil's advocate. Well, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. Someone's breaking into your back door. Who do you call? Well, I'm gonna call my neighbor. I'm gonna call my uncle and tell him to come over to the house. Somebody's coming to your house and you calling the neighbor? You ain't gonna call the police? And those are the kind of conversations that we were having. People are already doing things to keep themselves safe because they don't necessarily see the police as the safe option. And that's heartbreaking. But instead of resourcing people who are already doing that work, instead of resourcing communities, we continue to throw money at something that's not working.
Chief Shields, does LMPD view this deflection pilot as a promising step? I guess, where are officers on that idea?
Oh, for sure. I mean, was fortunate enough, there was something similar, not as robust as what I think is going to be, is not as robust as what is going to be rolled out here, because the city has appropriated a large amount of money to the deflection program. But so when you go into the history, more of the current history of policing, what ended up happening was when we saw all the mental health facilities close and everyone was put back on the streets, police became the front lines of dealing with mental health issues, because there was no one else tasked to do it. There wasn't the funding for it. This is going on for decades. And so when you look at and I can remember at the time when this really started to become robust and we saw more numbers, police, they didn't want this role. That wasn't what they viewed their job as police as, is running interference on all of these issues that they knew were not law enforcement related. And unfortunately, in almost every city in America, your largest mental health facility is the prison. And that in of itself is a problem. And so when you're a cop and you're tasked with, going out and dealing with these situations that you know are not criminal related, but you have to do something, that's not how you want to expend your time. And so what a program such as this does is, if done properly and we get it up and rolling, you're going to be triaging calls in the 911 center. And so if there is no need for a police response and it's something that a caseworker can handle, the caseworker goes out and handles it. So you're providing the resources that are actually needed for the call. And so I think it's one of these programs that has a huge amount of upside. The difficulty is it's not something you're going to see return on immediately. I think most social programs, you have to commit to funding for prolonged periods of time. And the problem is, and you're also trying to capture what's not occurring, right? So what the caseworker did is they made it a non-incident. Well, how do you capture that? And so the challenge is going to be convincing the powers that be to continue to fund the model so that it can become a part of the reimagining public safety, because it's not going to happen overnight. None of these issues occurred overnight, and it's going to take a while to turn it around.
Can my mic on? Just so we're clear, a lot of money has not been given to this project. It's been 2.9. Okay, so let's be real clear about that. And so when we talk about funding it, and we agree on this, it needs to be a long-term investment. It needs to be a real investment. We just gave LMPD $17 million more last week, and they gave us 2.9, period. So again, when I say it's community-driven and community needs to have this conversation, that needs to be part of the conversation. So you heard Chief Shields say it needs to be a long-term investment and be an intentional investment. So please make sure that we make that the call. Councilwoman
She
McCray.
actually just made a strong case for divesting in law enforcement, so I appreciate that. You actually made a very strong case because we're criminalizing mental illness and addiction and poverty. And I know that sounds scary. People are like, oh my God, well, I'm gonna lose my job. It's gonna be fewer police officers. Good. I think for me, I would love to be worked out of a job because racism has been eradicated. So we should not be afraid that people are going to lose jobs because problems are being solved. So I appreciate you making that case for divestment.
What I'd like to see is more partnership, because what it is we're here. Now we need to figure out how to make the deflection model work, to make sure racism is perhaps closer to being eradicated someday, and that the police department is open and being more transparent and willing to work with the community to help bring about some type of comfort and some type of trust. So, when we say deflection, that's what we really mean. We want to deflect some of the problems that are really plaguing our communities, but we want to be able to fund it and understand what it means, because if someone came up to you and asked you what this program does, you would not be able to communicate it. So we need more information about it so that you can advocate properly for it. And when we know about it and we know outcomes that are associated with it, we are more than happy to fund it.
And I want to challenge that. And when we say we have 172 homicides and cops are supposed to be stopping violence and preventing crimes, we keep throwing them money and their numbers don't look that great. I'm just saying.
Yeah. It's all about partnerships.
We gave them a whole lot of money. We gave them a whole lot of money last year in the midst of an uprising in this city. And up to millions and millions. I don't even know the number now at this point. It was like 3 times we gave them money. And homicides continue to grow. Crime has not been prevented. Crime has not been stopped. And not only did we give them more money and crime has raised, they harassed, beat, tear gas, rubber bulleted people for 300 days. So we paid them to abuse us. And then you want to give us $2.9 million to do something that we know is effective. And so we have to, like Chief Shields said, we have to have an intentional, long-term investment in doing what's right. Police officers do not need to be social workers, or therapists, or Ubers, or ambulances, right? Because at this point, they're doing all of that, right? And so we don't need them to do that. So we need to figure out how we reallocate those funds to programs that can do that work.
So
that should do that work.
Sorry. Kalila, you mentioned the $17 million that went to LMPD just recently. That was some American Rescue Plan money that was flowing for LMPD to make improvements that were connected to this DOJ investigation. This is for any of the panelists. Do you think that a bigger police budget is the kind of outcome the community is expecting or hoping from that investigation?
What community? What community would ask for that?
So no.
I want somebody to answer that.
Yeah.
Well, now as a legislator, let me just say that what we look at are outcomes. When we have a pool of money, it's your money. So we have to make sure that we are allocating it properly to programs that work. We are hopeful that the deflection model works. We want to put more money into it, and we will if you can justify what you need and what works. If the police department isn't working, we do need to redirect those funds.
So when are we going to start doing that? Because it's not working.
Yeah,
but we put more money into the budget in order to put these programs together. We are waiting to see what works. And what works is what will get the attention and the funding.
but it hasn't worked.
But we have not put money into these programs yet. We've put money in LMPD. We get what you're saying there, but we've also now put way more money in these other programs, and we want those programs to work. If indeed they work and LMPD is a model to look at, now we have something to compare and say, you know what, we can do less with this and more here.
So is LMPD working?
But we've not given it a chance. I really am asking you,
Is LMPD working?
I don't think they're working to the extent that they should be working, or it should be working for the community. Absolutely not.
So let me ask you another question. When did you discover that LMPD was not working?
No,
Was this
that's not the
before?
question. The question.
It's my question.
Yeah, but the question for me to answer is this. We are looking at LMPD,
Okay.
but we are sure enough looking at these programs to work so that we can justify why we are supporting the programs and find out why we're supporting LMPD at the level we're supporting them. We all can agree that we've had some horrible outcomes in LMPD in any police department throughout the nation. There's no question about that. There's no question about that. But now we got to figure out, how do we stop some of this crime? How do we help lift people out of poverty? How do we get people to do the job that is really fit for them, like the healthcare industry and the people with the mental health background? That's what we put our money in, and that's what we are continuing to do. But we do need outcomes. We have to make sure that where our money is being placed, we're looking at outcomes, and that's what you all want as well.
Yeah, and so I will say this, because I know you're not the only one making decisions, but I want you to hear that on one hand you're saying we want to put money where something works, but we're going to wait and see if yours work. Now we know yours is not working, so we're going to keep funding it in hopes that it will start working.
Well, let me say that's not what I'm saying. And first of all, let me just say too that I am not the one that even approved the budget.
Then quit defending it.
I'm not defending. Right. I'm defending funding for programs that we want to work. We did that. That's what I'm defending. And I'm defending also the opportunity for these programs to work, show outcomes. And I'm also suggesting that if LMPD does not work moving forward with everything that we have entrusted to them, not only will the funding go, but the chief will go too. It's just that simple. We just have to be honest with each other. We're not here to point fingers or to say what's not been working. We know what hasn't worked. We have put enough money, and when I say we, I'm saying the Metro Council has approved enough money for everybody to prove their program. And if you can prove your program is working, you're going to get more funding. If you don't prove that you're working, you're going to get less funding. It's just that simple.
I do want to give you a chance to weigh in, Chief. What would you say to someone who argues the department hasn't been performing, so why are they getting more money?
Listen, no, I get it. I don't think anyone's going to jump up and down when police get more money. I understand that. I mean, I think on any given day, we'd like to see more in the way of parks, better roads, what have you. So the 17 million that you've spoken to is directly tied to with meeting some of the expectations we know we're going to have to do to meet the Department of Justice mandate, however that may look. And so this is one of the pitfalls associated with the DOJs when they come in and they do, whether it's MOUs or consent decrees, is it's very costly to cities. And it's usually hitting cities who are coming off of a crisis. That's why they're there. So I understand that folks don't want to see the money there. And if I'm trying to jumpstart a program, yeah, I'd much rather have 17 million. But at the end of the day, for the city to move the police department forward and meet those demands that are going to be put on us, rest assured, there has to be investments made in whether it's technology, training, personnel. So it's not, it's just, I get it. That is always the yin and the yang of consent decrees and MOUs with the Department of Justice. I think everyone can feel as though, okay, we understand why they're here, but they don't want the bill that goes with them, the financial bill. But at the end of the day, if you're trying to get out of this hole, you do have to invest in the product.
I think we're going to switch to some audience questions, unless you all have any final thoughts you want to share. Okay. This question says, it's for Chief Shields. Some years ago, the Center for Women and Families accompanied police officers on-the-job training. This could work with others with expertise. Is this still going on, or could it be activated?
I'm not aware that they're accompanying police, but to be fair, I've come in on the heels of, and still in the midst of COVID, so a lot of things have been unusual. And so it's possible it was suspended pre-COVID. It is not occurring right now, but a number of things that involve community engagement were suspended as a result of the pandemic.
Darcy, I can speak to that. So the program does no longer exist because it was a grant-funded program. That funding is gone and no longer exists. We actually spoke to some people who were part of that program as we were preparing to get this off the ground, and they talked about the success it was having. We know that domestic violence situations are some of the most dangerous for everyone involved, police officers included, but it definitely made a difference. As someone who used to work at the center as well, I also worked there, and it was a very positive program, but again, as funding and as priorities and as buzzwords change and trends change, the funding sources change and so no longer exist.
Sorry, Chief Shields, a lot of these are for you. 2 years ago, LMPD seeking SWAT team came in uniforms, battering rams, giant guns, helicopters, recruiting urban soldiers. Has your targeted audience for recruitment changed?
Yeah, I mean, that's not unique to LMPD. Unfortunately, that's kind of been the trend in policing, and I think your more astute agencies recognize that community policing needs to be the face of any recruitment efforts. So we're looking at everything, but no, we're not, we can't be urban soldiers, right? And I think any professional organization in law enforcement recognizes that or has to recognize that.
This question is for any of the panelists. Can any of you speak on what it would be like to abolish the current model of policing?
To abolish it, I don't know what that would look like, but I do know that if you go out to the suburbs, they have a model that's working for them because they're resourced. They have what they need, so there are not a lot of police in that area because they have their basic needs met. So I think we have a model. We have a model.
By investing in the resources of a community and making sure everyone has what they need. This one is for you again, Chief. What do you suggest a victim of police brutality do? How does LMPD handle these situations, and how does LMPD help victims as these instances can be traumatizing?
Well, and I think this goes to Councilwoman McCraney's bill on creating the Civilian Review Board. So if you're talking about someone who has a complaint, whatever the nature, against police, what we have to offer is the equivalent of what's commonly referred to as internal affairs, which for most people, they're content using that. But let's assume that you really feel traumatized. What is an alternative? When you have these civilian review boards, it allows an individual to go somewhere other than a police department to file a complaint, and yet it'll still be investigated judiciously on both sides. So I think that is one of the most important things about review boards, is just creating a space where people can go to seek help and remedy that is not under the guise of the police department.
Anyone else want to weigh in on that question?
I think that there are ways through LMPD to do that, but I don't know if you all have filed a complaint lately, but they haven't responded in months. Not even a response like a, hey, I got your email. So that process needs to be revamped or something, because there's no response.
No, she's spot on there. So when I came in, there were 70 files in the chief's office backed up. Files went back 3-4 years. which is, it's just ridiculous, because first off, you're not giving the citizen any confidence in the system. The employee has no confidence in the leadership, and if there is behaviors that are either improper or just are exemplifying a need for more training, it's of no value if you're coming at someone 4 years after the fact. And so one of the things that we have done is I have put on staff a couple of attorneys who are spearheading the review of all these files, moving them. We're creating a discipline matrix. That's standard. There's never been one. The discipline matrix is so communicating to the employees that they can expect that this is for misconduct. So this is what you can expect to receive if you have a courtesy complaint. This is what you excuse me, can expect to receive if you have a traffic accident. With, of course, there's always mitigating and extenuating circumstances. But the discipline manual was not where it needed to be. So those are core pillars of any law enforcement agency, and they weren't there in the form and fashion that's needed. And unfortunately, it lends itself to exactly what you just heard: is wait a minute, I'm not hearing anything, which is wrong.
This question is also for Chief Shields, but I think the second part, especially I think the first part, anyone could weigh in on. The question is, how can the community get involved to bring unity? How do we heal from the trauma that has come from continuous police brutality and killings done by police to Black members of this city?
Well, I think first off, it's something like we're here tonight. It's a forum. There has to be dialogue. And I understand that, listen, in my position, I'll hear rage on both sides of the aisles. And what I recognize is if we are going to move forward as a city, there has to be dialogue. It can be dissension, but there's got to be dialogue. And I think that when I look at the United States, my greatest fear for democracy is the fact that we've lost the ability to communicate. We yell, we hate, we cut one another down, we crash the gates at the White House. So when I look at the community, what I would say is what I'm trying to instill and would hope that the community can work with me on is engaging in conversation, very candid and honest conversation about what is needed, what is being experienced, what the community, in particular the Black community, is seeing. Because at the end of the day, 172 homicides, 75% of them are African American. It means that police are going to be in the Black communities. So I really need us to collectively identify how that is going to look, because when you layer onto it the fact that Kentucky is like Georgia, where I came from, and there is essentially no gun laws, the proliferation of illegal weapons is astounding. And it's some part, unfortunately, all of these other programs we talk about are fantastic. And I believe if they're invested in down the road, you may get to a space where there's less of a need to use the gun. But that's not what we're seeing today. We're seeing guns everywhere and people willing to use them just for nothing.
Anyone else have thoughts about that police community dynamic?
I have 3 words: tell the truth. We have to start with truth telling across the board. Policemen need to be held accountable for their actions. We need to tell the truth about police actions. Police need to follow the law their damn selves. They're not above the law. And I just think, even if we keep having these conversations, and I love conversations, if we're not telling the truth, we're wasting time. I could be somewhere having a bourbon or something. We got to tell the truth.
And just to piggyback off of that, I still go back to, we have to have acknowledgement of the harm that's been done. Again, there's been no acknowledgement of, sometimes we mess up. Yeah, we fuck this up. I ain't excusing my language. Y'all know who I am. Sometimes you mess up, right? And so you can own that and say, right, we're sorry for the harm we caused, and we're doing these things to make this change. Because if you're not acknowledging the harm that's been caused, then everything you do is tainted. It's not, because you're not starting with the root of acknowledging the harm.
Admit what we did to Breonna Taylor. Let's tell the truth. Just tell the truth. If you jacked it up, you jacked it up. But somebody's life was taken. And instead of telling the truth, we're coming up with all these different reasons why we did this and why we started this and why we looked over here. And all of it's a lie. Tell the truth. That's how you heal. You can't heal based on lies. You can't heal with misinformation. You have to tell the truth. And I think if we really want to heal, again, we have to tell the truth. It sounds simple, and that's because it really is. Just tell the truth.
Our community wants transparency. So as we're telling the truth, and we're hopeful that Chief Shields tonight can do exactly what you're asking her to do. She's the leader of the department, and I think I've heard her say that they've messed up, but perhaps she needs to say it again and again and again. But I can tell you that as the truth is coming forward, we need transparency all the time. We need to be able to trust that what is coming out of the mouths of LMPD, FOP, is that it's the truth. And we want to see the police department and the FOP come to terms with holding officers accountable. And while LMPD is one faction, FOP is a totally different animal. And I don't know, I truly don't know how we're going to get that to change. But we have to hope that we are going to try and get them to be the truth tellers. And perhaps it will spill over, because if you're holding them accountable, they are the members of the FOP. And if they know that they're going to be held accountable, then maybe some of the things that we've seen in the past will stop happening. But Chief Shields, perhaps it's time for you to say it again.
Oh, listen, I'll own it all day long that, you know what, we in law enforcement, we've made some horrendous mistakes. We've caused irreparable damage to portions of the black community. I mean, we've been the enforcement arm of this country.
All of it, because what happens to
all the black community. So, listen, I'm not downplaying the significance of it, right? We're an extension of this country. And anybody who is sitting here and thinking it's just a police issue is missing the entirety of this picture. And the reality of it is we are the face of it, and we can cause some of the most damage because we're empowered to take away all of your liberties in life. But at the end of the day, if we're going to change this paradigm, it has to be throughout our society. And there is a difference. There is a difference in how we view one another. And to the white people who think that being woke is having a Black Lives Matter sign in their yard, I say no, that's a sign. Look at who you're at work with. Look at your executive board. Are black individuals in key positions? What is the diversity of your employer? Are the opportunities and the efforts given to black employees the same as they are the white employees? Are you speaking up at the table when everyone looks like you and saying, let's do this differently? Are you correcting the person, your friend, when they make that snide remark that we all know what they're saying? Those are all the subtleties that manifest into discrimination, and I end up hiring some of these employees, giving them a gun and badge, and it can become a very pronounced and damaging behavior. So you're not going to get me saying that there's not an issue or there's not a wrong. I don't sleep well at night ever, because I hope for the sake of God that we're doing the right thing. All right? But so no one is here saying that this is easy, but I go back to there has to be the dialogue across all avenues. And, I'll be the first to say, and it's only, one of the things that I dislike most about my career is when I came on, That was during the crack epidemic. And in hindsight, it was ludicrous. I mean, crack was just this little hit, right? And we used to all get, I mean, that was the face of what was going to tear this country apart. And I think many of you in here are younger that may not remember this, but some of you who are a little older will remember it was the policy and the position of the United States that crack was killing this country. Newsweek would have on its cover the big black boogeyman who was going to slit everyone's throat. That was the mindset of the United States. We took the position that if you had 3 strikes, 3 of these arrests with this tiny little hit of crack, you're going to federal prison forever. I was a part of that system because I worked in policing, and that was what we operated under. You have to go arrest these individuals, and you just went out and you did it without giving thought to it. So now we fast forward 20, 25 years. Where are we today? You look at the opioid epidemic. Opioid, I will argue all day long, is a white person's fancy word for heroin. And what do we do? What do we do when folks start getting addicted to heroin, start getting addicted to prescription drugs? It's a health crisis. We get insurance companies, the big employers, to pay for rehab. We write supportive articles about it. We profile them across TV. We make heroes of people who kicked addiction. Good. I say good because we got it right. But guess what? The damage is still done. The damage has still been done, and that has been something that law enforcement has been a part of. And it's not a part of my career that I'm happy with, but it also helps me understand all of the work that we have to do to move forward. So thank you for allowing me to answer.
And that's truth telling.
I got the wrap it up signal from my boss, but I do want to give each of you a chance to give just final thoughts, maybe what average residents, average officers can do to really improve the city, improve policing moving forward, focus on solutions.
Well, I'll start by saying I am currently reading this book called Knowledge in the Blood. This book is by J.D. Jansen. This book is about apartheid, or the end of apartheid as we know it. But this gentleman was the first African American to be hired at a university in South Africa. And his stories talk about how racism is handed down from generation to generation. And as I read this book, I mirror it to what's happening in America today. Nothing looks different. Apartheid doesn't look any different than what is going on here in America. I say this and I bring this up to say it's racism, pure and simple. And until we stop handing down our biases, our prejudices, and some of the racist behaviors that we have or that have been handed down to us, we're not going to get anywhere. So I am asking the audience to, as I think Chief Shields said, as you hear people say these racist things, it's up to you to stop it and say no more. And then carry on the mantle of dismantling racism in your heart and in your families, in your communities. What is it going to take for us to move forward together now? We've heard what we've heard tonight, and I think that, again, I go back to partnerships. We have to work together in order to move forward. I'm here as a legislator saying that if we find solutions, we will fund them. We will fight hard. If you send us a budget, show us where it can work, we will fund it. I can go out on a limb and say at least I will fight for it, for the funding. And if LMPD, as much money as we have put into it, does not work moving forward, then defund the police is not a term that you just hear bantering around. We're going to have to figure out a way to give less monies there and put more monies in programs that work. And that's what I'm here, and that's what I will be continuing to advocate, along with trying to help people understand that if you are racist in your heart, you're going to be racist in your behavior, and it's time out for that.
I want to give some direct action steps. One, the Dove Delegates, which is the Deflection Project, is currently hiring. So if you want to be part of this work, helping redefine public safety and reimagining community safety, you can go, you have a link tree. It's Linktree LOU_DOVE, and the job postings will be posted there. If you want, you can come to me afterwards and I can give you my information so you can get involved. Again, if you want to apply for the job, then that's available. If you want to just be involved in the process and keep up with what's going on, that's also available. And so that's I'm gonna leave it at that for me.
So I would love for some of that $17 million that was given to go toward an investment. I would love to see LMPD read this book, Policing the Black Man. And I have a group of colleagues that can come in and help facilitate those discussions.
Chief, any final thought?
I just appreciate being on this esteemed panel. Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us or tuning in. Here's Rachel.
I just want to thank everybody for coming tonight. Thank you to the audience for being here and asking good questions. And I think we can all agree we're not going to agree on everything, but we do have to create spaces that we can have dialogue with differing opinions to move forward. And we hope we got some of that tonight. That's what we're hoping to do with these racial reckoning conversations. And I think we can all agree we still have a long way to go. So thank you all very much to our storytellers. As always, Dr. Williams, appreciate it. Judge Clayton had to get home. Her son, just so you know, is an esteemed dancer and was performing tonight, and she needed to get home to be able to watch. So I'm hoping she's enjoying that. And thank you all very much for coming tonight. We really appreciate it.